Have you ever noticed how some people can't seem to exist in silence? How they reach for their phone the moment a conversation ends, turn on the TV before they've even set down their keys, fill every car ride with podcasts, every meal with background shows, every quiet moment with something, anything, that drowns out the stillness? There's something fascinating about this. We live in the noisiest era in human history, yet silence has never felt more terrifying to so many people. And here's the paradox. The more noise we consume, the more we seem to need it. The more we fill the silence, the louder it becomes when we finally face it. But what is it about silence that feels so unbearable? What are people really running from when they reach for that remote, those earbuds, that endless scroll of content? Let me tell you something that might change how you see this behavior forever. You know someone like this. Maybe you are someone like this. They sleep with a fan running. Not because they're hot, but because they need the white noise. They work with music playing, not for focus, but to fill the space. They cook with Netflix on. They drive with podcasts. They exercise with playlists. Every waking moment has a soundtrack, a narrator, a voice that isn't their own. And if you ask them why, they'll tell you it helps them concentrate, that it's just background noise, that it's no big deal. But here's the thing. It is a big deal. Because what we're really looking at isn't a preference. It's a defense mechanism. The psychology behind this runs deeper than simple habit. Research in neuroscience and behavioral psychology reveals something profound. Our brains process silence differently than we process sound. When we're surrounded by noise, our minds can focus outward, on the music, the voices, the content. But in silence, the brain has nowhere to go but inward. And that's where it gets complicated. Dr. Thuivi Nguyen's research on solitude at Durham University found that many people actively avoid being alone with their thoughts, not because they're afraid of loneliness, but because they're afraid of what emerges in the quiet. In one study, participants were asked to sit alone with their thoughts for just 15 minutes. No phone, no book, no distractions. A significant number found the experience so uncomfortable that they would have rather given themselves mild electric shocks than sit in silence. Think about that for a moment. Physical pain was preferable to mental stillness. So what's really happening in that silence that feels so threatening? Here's what's really going on. Silence isn't emptiness. Silence is exposure. When you remove external stimulation, your internal world becomes impossible to ignore. The thoughts you've been postponing, the emotions you've been avoiding, the questions you don't want to answer, they all surface in the quiet. For people who need constant noise, silence feels like standing naked in front of a mirror they've been avoiding for years. And what that mirror reflects varies from person to person. For some, it's anxiety. The catastrophic thoughts they've been outrunning with podcasts and playlists finally catch up. Without distraction, the brain's default mode network, the neural system that activates during rest, begins its work. And for anxious minds, this often means rumination, worry, the endless loop of what-ifs. For others, it's deeper than anxiety. It's what psychologists call experiential avoidance, the unwillingness to remain in contact with uncomfortable internal experiences. This isn't weakness, this is a learned survival strategy, often rooted in attachment theory. Think about it this way. If you grew up in an environment where your emotional needs weren't met, where expressing feelings was unsafe, where you learned that your internal world was too much or not enough, you developed coping mechanisms. You learned to focus outward instead of inward. You learned to fill the space where self-reflection might occur. Constant noise becomes emotional anesthesia. But here's what's fascinating. The noise doesn't actually solve the problem. It just delays the confrontation. Your brain is remarkably adaptable. Neuroplasticity means it constantly rewires itself based on what you practice. And when you practice constant distraction, you're training your brain to depend on external stimulation for regulation. Dr. Mari Swingle, a neuroscientist who studies the effects of digital technology on brain development, describes this as a form of borrowed regulation. Instead of developing internal mechanisms to manage discomfort, process emotions, or tolerate uncertainty, the brain outsources this work to external sources. Over time, the neural pathways that support self-reflection, introspection, and internal emotional regulation actually weaken from underuse. It's not unlike a muscle that atrophies when you stop exercising it. And this is where it gets really interesting. Your brain's reward system gets involved too. Every time you reach for noise to escape discomfort, and that noise provides relief, your brain releases dopamine. The discomfort fades, the distraction works, and your brain learns noise equals safety, silence equals threat. This creates a feedback loop. The more you avoid silence, the more threatening silence becomes. The more threatening it becomes, the more you need noise to feel okay. And the cycle continues. But there's another layer to this that we rarely talk about. For many people, constant noise isn't just about avoiding discomfort, it's about avoiding themselves. Carl Jung wrote about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge or integrate. In modern life, we've become extraordinarily skilled at ensuring we never meet our own shadow. We've externalized our entire internal experience. When you're constantly consuming other people's thoughts through podcasts, other people's stories through shows, other people's lives through social media, you're never forming your own thoughts. You're never sitting with your own story. You're never confronting your own life. There's a profound loneliness in this. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of never being with yourself. The philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote in the 17th century, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." He was onto something that's become exponentially more relevant in the age of smartphones and streaming services. Here's the truth. You can't outrun yourself forever. And this is where the long-term effects become impossible to ignore. When you spend years avoiding silence, avoiding introspection, avoiding the internal work of being human, something happens. You lose touch with your own desires, your own values, your own sense of self. You become a curator of distractions rather than the author of your own life. Research on mindfulness and self-awareness shows that the ability to tolerate silence and engage in self-reflection is directly linked to emotional intelligence, decision-making ability, and overall psychological well-being. People who can't sit with themselves struggle to understand themselves. They make decisions based on reaction rather than reflection. They chase external validation because they've lost connection with internal knowing. The constant noise doesn't just mask discomfort, it prevents growth, because growth requires confrontation. It requires you to sit with the uncomfortable questions. Who am I becoming? What do I actually want? What am I avoiding? What needs to change? These questions don't have soundtracks. They don't come with background music or scripted narratives. They emerge in the quiet. But maybe the most profound thing about this pattern is what it reveals about our relationship with existence itself. Existential psychology suggests that humans have a fundamental anxiety about the void, about meaninglessness, about our own mortality, about the ultimate unknowability of life. This is normal. This is part of being conscious and aware. But in modern life, we've developed unprecedented tools to avoid this fundamental confrontation with existence. We've created endless content, infinite scrolling, perpetual stimulation, anything to avoid sitting with the basic facts of being alive. Silence, in this sense, isn't just the absence of sound. It's the presence of reality. It's the confrontation with the simple, profound, sometimes terrifying fact. You are here. You are alive. You are you. And for many people, that's the most uncomfortable thing they can face. So when someone reaches for their phone in an elevator, when they turn on the TV, the moment they wake up, when they can't drive without a podcast playing, they're not just seeking entertainment, They're seeking refuge from the weight of their own existence. But here's where this gets hopeful. Awareness is the beginning of change. If you recognize yourself in this pattern, that recognition itself is powerful. Because once you see what you're doing, you can start to understand why you're doing it. And once you understand why, you can begin to make different choices. The goal isn't to eliminate all noise or live in perpetual silence. The goal is to develop a healthier relationship with both, to create space where silence isn't threatening but restorative, where being alone with yourself isn't something to escape, but something to welcome. This starts small. Maybe it's driving to work without a podcast once a week. Maybe it's sitting with your coffee in the morning without immediately reaching for your phone. Maybe it's taking a walk without earbuds, just once, to see what thoughts emerge. Here's what you'll discover. The first few minutes of silence feel excruciating. Your brain will throw everything at you: anxiety, restlessness, boredom, the urgent need to check something, anything. This is normal. This is your brain's defense system engaging. But if you stay with it, something shifts. The noise in your head begins to settle. The thoughts that felt overwhelming start to organize themselves. The emotions that felt too big become manageable when you allow yourself to actually feel them. Psychologists call this affect tolerance, the ability to experience uncomfortable emotions without immediately trying to change or avoid them. And it's a skill. Like any skill, it improves with practice. And maybe the most important thing to understand is this. If you've been living with constant noise, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken, you're not weak. You learn to cope with something, maybe overwhelm, maybe trauma, maybe a world that felt too big and too loud in a different way. You found a strategy that worked, that got you through. But strategies that help us survive don't always help us thrive. What served you once might now be holding you back from the self-knowledge, the emotional depth, the authentic presence that you're capable of. So here's what I want you to know. Silence isn't the enemy. Silence is where you meet yourself. And yes, that meeting might be uncomfortable at first. You might discover things you've been avoiding, unprocessed grief, unnamed anxiety, questions about your life that you haven't wanted to ask. But you'll also discover something else. You're stronger than you think, more resilient than you've given yourself credit for, capable of sitting with discomfort and finding meaning in it. The noise will always be there when you need it, but so will you. And maybe, just maybe, the most radical thing you can do in a world that's constantly screaming for your attention is to turn it all off, sit in the quiet, and listen to the one voice that matters most. The one that's been waiting patiently beneath all that noise, your own.